Hello and welcome to this session of Connected Ink, where we'll discuss electronic handwritten signatures today. My name is Ken, I'm Marketing Director of Walkup for Business, and with me today is Niko Kalantzis, Forensic Document Examiner from Greece. Niko, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I'm Niko Kalantzis. I'm a Forensic Handwriting Examiner with Hartoularios Institute of Question Document Studies in Piraeus, Greece. I have a BSc in Physics, a postgraduate diploma in Forensic Science, and an MSc in Question Document Analysis. I'm a researcher at Staffordshire University and a member of the steering committee of the European Network of Forensic Handwriting Experts. And today we will be discussing anything and everything related to electronic handwritten signatures.
So the handwritten signature has served us for centuries. Now that we've firmly arrived in the digital age, what role does the electronic handwritten signature play? Isn't that technology a bit anachronistic?
Well, I would approach this issue the other way around. And it is true that handwriting and signature has been around as a part of human behavior for not centuries, but millennia. And it's not that this part of the human behavior needs to adapt around the advances of technology, but it's the technology that needs to advance and adapt and engulf the already given and established human behavior that includes handwriting and signature execution.
So what advantages then has it to, as you say, adapt, the offline signature or analog signature to the digital world?
Well, first of all, the handwritten signature has been around like forever. So it's part of the human behavior in everyday transactions. It's something that we gradually learn how to do. We don't need to get trained into it. It's part of a person's individuality. And that's how it is being introduced in the legal transactions. From the writer's point of view, it's an extension of themselves. It's a testimony of their identity and their consent in performing any type of legal transactions. So you have that factor. It's part of the human identity. It's easy to execute, and it's something that you always carry with you. So these are good criteria, good characteristics for a biometric means of authentication, right? And then you have the long history of the signature from the legal framework. And we can see that in the European area, for example, since 1677, we have the Statute of Frauds Act in the British Parliament, where there's a set of transactions and contracts that require the execution of a handwritten signature in order for them to be valid. So there's a long history, not only within the person and the writer as part of the human behavior, but also within the legal framework and the very structure of the way government and individual government and institution transactions work. So you have that, it is established, it is safe, and any new type of media, including the electronic handwritten signatures, need to tap into that and draw from that experience and adapt accordingly.
So from your perspective, where would you then recommend using the electronic handwritten signature?
Wherever the proper infrastructure can be deployed, meeting the designated requirements, then yes, it can be used anywhere by anyone.
So, and let me ask you, why would you not use another means of authentication? So why should companies invest in the necessary pen technology not in another form of electronic signature?
Well, first of all, we need to define what the term electronic signature means. Electronic signature is an umbrella term that describes several different types of digital authentication procedures. And if we look at the ADAS regulation, for example, we can see that one-time passwords, email codes, smart cards, cryptography, and biometric signatures all are parts of the group that we identify as electronic signatures. The issue with electronic signatures in general is that if they do not include any type of biometric data, then they can be decoupled. They can be separated by their designated user, regardless of whether there is consent to this or not. And I can give you a familiar example to everyone, and it has to do with credit cards and how we progressed from the signature to the chip and pin, for example. and now currently to contactless technology. So when the credit card was first introduced, you had to sign on the receipt in order to authenticate and complete the transaction. So you had biometric data that would prove that it was you performing the transaction. And then to accommodate consumer needs, we moved to the chip and PIN, where all you need to do is know a 4-digit number. The problem with this is that it can be transferable. And obviously, a lot of us have given our credit card to our partners and the PIN code just to facilitate something, to save time and so on. But would we trust such a low-level security option when we are signing a contract or taking a loan of a 5-digit amount, just a chip and PIN type of security and technology? That's where the electronic handwritten signature stands out.
But that's also true for all biometric signatures. So why then not use fingerprint or facial recognition or other means of biometric authentication?
Well, that is true. There are other biometric signatures apart from the handwritten or the electronic handwritten signature. The problem with all the other biometric data is that there's no proof of consent and intent. With the handwritten signature, the essence of the handwritten signature is that the person will produce the biometric data on the spot and therefore proving intent. Other types of biometric data like iris scans or fingerprints and so on, they are related to the person, but they cannot prove consent for the designated transaction.
One question that also comes to mind is, do we actually sign differently on an electronic display than on paper?
Well, that's a valid question in the sense that we have a transition from the typical liquid ink medium on a paper substrate to a plastic tip stylus on a glass surface. But apart from the theoretical approach to this issue, there have been several experiments, and there was a massive experiment performed by the STEFA Group 8 and the European Network of Forensic Handwriting Experts, the results of which were published last year. And the experiment included 3,200 signatures, and the results were that on a forensic level, there is no difference in the signing behavior between the traditional liquid ink signature and the electronic handwritten signature. So from the aspect of the writer, the execution of the signature formation is the same.
Is it then safe to say that the electronic handwritten signature is equivalent to the standard pen and paper handwritten signature?
If we want to approach equivalence, we have to consider the 3 aspects of the handwritten signature that make it such an ideal medium for identification and authentication. So first of all, you have the familiarity of the execution of the handwritten signature to the person, to the user. Then you have the long history on the legal framework where the entire legal system has been built around the existence of such a means of authentication. And thirdly, you have an established and scientifically valid methodology to determine authenticity on a forensic level in case of a dispute. All these 3 points are met with the electronic handwritten signature.
So I want to ask you about the security of handwritten signatures. We all know that no 2 signatures are ever the same, so never identical. Isn't that an invitation to forgery?
No. The reason why signatures are never identical is the fact that signing and writing are dynamic aspects of human behavior. When a forensic handwriting expert is called in a case to determine the authenticity of a signature, he first examines a set of known signatures, determining the range of natural variation, and then moving on, they will examine the disputed signature and the characteristics therein and determine whether they belong within or outside the boundaries of natural variation.
So can you explain a little bit in detail what you mean with natural variation?
Well, if we look at a signature and want to analyze it, we can divide the characteristics in 2 big groups. One would be the pictorial characteristics, the two-dimensional information of the shape, construction, and so on. And the other would be the dynamic characteristics, the pressure profile, the speed of execution, fluency, and so on. So these features are never identical, but they follow specific patterns. So the forensic handwriting expert will focus on these categories and try to define the pattern that is found in the slightly different executed signatures.
So can a forger incorporate both type of characteristics in his forgery attempt?
Well, the answer here is no, and the reason is that the forger will consciously try to copy a signature, whilst the owner of the signature will just automatically execute the fine motor program as it is recorded by his neuromuscular system. To give you an idea, the forger will either invest on the pictorial characteristics, executing a slow adaptation of the signature, trying to have as close as possible a similar shape, sacrificing the dynamic characteristics of signing, or they can invest in a more natural execution of their simulation attempt, losing the accuracy of the two-dimensional characteristics because it's not their automated signature. So every type of freehand simulation or freehand forgery will fall somewhere in between these two extremities.
So how does this translate into electronic handwritten signature data?
Well, first of all, if we consider the electronic handwritten signature as a high-speed recording of the spatial position of the tip of the stylus, the time, and the exercised force, then the first group of characteristics, which has to do with the pictorial features, the two-dimensional features, is quickly dealt with because you have all the information there. Regarding the dynamic aspects of handwriting, the electronic handwritten signature actually proves to be advantageous to the pen and paper product because it can provide, first of all, a quantifiable data set regarding the exercised force. In the pen and paper world, we approach that aspect of writing that we call pressure qualitatively by studying under the stereo microscope the ink trace on the paper substrate. In the digital world, we have the opportunity to look at figures, to look at numerical values with great accuracy, and therefore alter and advance our way of both understanding and evaluating the evidence that have to do with that dynamic aspect of writing. Furthermore, we can accurately measure time with the electronic handwritten signature, which is a feature that we never had access to. We could qualitatively, again, approximate the time derivative of space looking at velocity, speed of execution, but now we can actually measure the time of execution. We can measure speed of execution, acceleration, and so on. And that is a characteristic that is, first of all, untouchable when we are talking about pen and paper signatures, which means it will probably be unknown to the forger. And even if they do have a knowledge of our approximation of the time of execution of the model signature, it will be very difficult for them to succeed both in the execution of the pictorial characteristics within the very short natural time of execution of an original signature. But the most groundbreaking feature, if we are discussing about an electromagnetic resonance technology solution, is the ability of this equipment to record the pen position in air over the active area of the digitizer. This allows us to track and then visualize the inner movements, meaning the way that the pen and the hand move without touching the surface. And that gives us valuable information that is also inaccessible and unknown to the forger.
So in short, to summarize that, the electronic handwritten signature, makes it much harder for the forger to actually forge a signature because it provides the forensic document examiners then with a lot more data and a lot more tools to investigate the question signature.
That is correct. And the electronic handwritten signature, when it meets the requirement of the ADAS regulation, provides additional tools for other forensic specialists, like forensic IT experts, for example, that guarantee the temporal signature of the transaction and the location of the transaction. So yes, we have additional tools for the forensic handwriting expert, but also for other experts as well, leading to a very secure product.
What is eIDAS and why is it relevant to everyone?
Well, eIDAS is a regulation of the European Union, and it has been in full effect since the end of September 2018. It is a regulation, which means it does not require national parliament approval in order to take effect. And the eIDAS regulation describes the requirements that need to be met in order to have legally binding digital documents that include electronic signatures.
So, and what is it about?
Well, eIDAS refers to electronic signatures, which is an umbrella term that includes one-time passwords, smart cards, cryptography, and biometric signatures. The content of the eIDAS is to define the various requirements and the legally binding effect of the digital product that meets these requirements. And the interesting part of eIDAS is that if you look at Articles 25 and 26, you will see that the handwritten signature is mentioned as the standard that the electronic signatures need to meet up to.
So, what do you mean when you say that handwritten signatures are used as a standard?
Well, on Article 25, the eIDAS states that the qualified electronic signature shall have the equivalent legal effect of a handwritten signature. So it takes, by default, the handwritten signature as the standard for identification and authentication. And if we move further to Article 26, we see that the first three requirements for the advanced electronic signature are, first of all, that it is uniquely linked to the signatory, that it is capable of identifying the signatory, and that it is created using electronic signature creation data that the signatory can, with a high level of confidence, use under his sole control. So we can immediately understand that these three requirements are by default met by the electronic handwritten signature because they are characteristics of the traditional pen and paper handwritten signature. In contrast to that, other types of electronic signature fall short in some or all of these criteria.
How do electronic handwritten signatures compare to other forms of electronic signatures?
Well, being a forensic handwriting examiner, I would approach this from the forensic point of view, which means what happens in case of a dispute. In case of a dispute, the evidence, the proof of the transaction in other forms of electronic signatures like one-time passwords or smart cards rely outside the transaction itself, outside the evidence. In contrast to that, the electronic handwritten signature is on its own the evidence. So you don't need to rely to outside infrastructure that deal with the identification part of the equation. And most importantly, as with other biometric types of data, there is no decoupling in the electronic handwritten signature. This is not true for other forms of electronic signatures that do not contain biometric data. They can be decoupled, which means they can be separated from the designated owner.
What's the relevance of eIDAS for the consumer?
Well, regardless of how you perform your digital transactions, be it at home or through a smartphone on the road, etc., you need to know that the actions you are performing have legally binding effects. Otherwise, they're pointless. That's where the eIDAS come in, providing the requirements of the framework that will produce legally binding digital files. You need your transactions and the digital files that are produced from these transactions to withstand the forensic examination in court.
So we see handwritten electronic signature hardware in a lot of places, banks, retail shops, courier services, hospitality, hotels. So are they all the same?
No, they're not. In order to produce a legally binding digital document, there are requirements that need to to be met in the capturing of the signature motion. And these requirements are specified within the ADAS regulation. So the fact that someone presents you a smart device with a stylus or a finger and asks you to perform your signature formation does not mean by default that the end product can withstand legal and forensic scrutiny.
What kind of different levels do you see then, specifically with electronic handwritten signatures?
Well, first of all, we need to have proper capturing of the standard 4 channels of information, X and Y, spatial coordinates, time, and force data. And then we need to have that information included and properly encrypted in a digital container file. And the encryption process is actually very secure if it's provided by verified trusted service provider. But these requirements are not by default adopted by all deployed solutions around us. And unfortunately, even though the ADAS regulator is in full effect since September 2018, there are still a lot of solutions deployed around Europe and the world which do not meet these criteria and therefore mean that they will not withstand scrutiny on a legal or forensic framework.
So why should a company invest in pen technology rather than using, let's say, finger or mouse?
Well, the idea is that you touch upon already acquired knowledge and experience. So the signature execution with a pen-like device, like a stylus, is already acquired with your customer base, with the people that you perform your transactions with. Everything else is additional acquired knowledge. You might be able to train people to sign with the mouse, for example, but it's counterintuitive to introduce a new way of signature execution and expect reliability and repeatability from the point of the customer in order to reach a level where they can appropriately use that medium to authenticate transactions.
So there is several terms, digital signatures, electronic biometric signatures, and I think there's a lot of confusion about that. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the term signature is associated with a person's identity, which is trivial when we are talking about the handwritten product. It is this familiarity with the term that transferred it as a term that implies identification in the digital world. When we are talking about digital signatures, we are referring to digital files with cryptography that do not contain biometric data. The difference is exactly there. The presence of biometric data that can be used to identify the person, not just the transaction.
So how does that play into the advantage of handwritten electronic signatures in comparison to other authentication methods?
Well, exactly because the digital signatures do not contain biometric data, they rely on the surrounding infrastructure for proof of identity. In contrast to that, the electronic handwritten signature is self-contained and includes the identification information. Therefore, it does not rely to outside structures to make certain that it is the proper person, the owner of the signature, that is authenticating this transaction.
And what better way to finish this session than with these remarks by Niko. Thanks a lot for your attention. I hope you learned something new, and I wish you lots of more great insights in the remaining sessions of Connected Inc. 2021. Bye-bye.